Imagine, you're at the front of your English class about to give a presentation. Your mouth goes dry and your hands quiver as you grip your cue cards so tightly that your knuckles turn white. You get an uneasy feeling in your stomach and you start to hear your pulse thundering in your ears. Lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. How is it that we're able to hear our own pulse? Well, to answer this question, we need to take a closer look at the structure of our skull. Our skull is made up of 8 cranial bones and 14 facial bones, but for the purposes of this video, we're only going to focus on the cranial bones. They are the frontal, occipital, sphenoid, and ethmoid bones, along with 2 parietal and 2 temporal bones. We can see the boundaries of these bones by observing the major sutures of the skull. The coronal suture is where the parietal and frontal bones meet. The sagittal suture is where the 2 parietal bones meet at the very top of the head. The lambdoid suture is where the parietal and occipital bones meet at the back. The squamous suture is where the parietal and temporal bones meet. And since we have 2 parietal and 2 temporal bones, we have 2 of these sutures, one on both sides of the head. It's a bit harder to describe where the sphenoid and ethmoid bones are since they're deeper in the skull. They're really interesting bones, and I won't do them justice in this video, but very briefly, the sphenoid bone connects with all of the other cranial bones, so in a way, it ties all of the other bones together. You can feel a part of it if you move your fingers from your eyebrows towards the back of your head. You'll feel a slight depression at your temples. Those are the sphenoid tender points. People with headaches often report tenderness in those areas. The ethmoid bone is the deepest cranial bone. You can't feel it, but it forms your inner eye sockets and the walls of your nasal cavity. So, back to our original question. Why can we hear our pulse? Well, let's zoom into one particular cranial bone, the temporal bone. It has 3 parts, the squamous part, the tympanic part, and the petrous part. For this video, we're more concerned about the tympanic and the petrous parts since they form our ears. The tympanic part wraps around the external acoustic meatus, which is a fancy way of saying ear canal. At the end of the ear canal is where we find our tympanic membrane, which is a fancy way of saying eardrum. These anatomists and their fancy words. Ugh. But alas, that's what we have. What can you do? The petrous part creates the middle and internal ear cavity, which is where we find little ear bones in the cochlea that are very cool but are another subject for another time. Crucially, the petrous part of our temporal bone also contains foramina. Foramina, singular foramen, is a fancy way of saying hole. In fact, we have a bunch of holes all over our bones to allow nerves and blood vessels to pass through and get to where they need to be. One such hole is called the carotid foramen, which leads to the carotid canal. The carotid canal is the structure that leads the internal carotid artery into the cranial cavity. Remember that this is happening on both sides of the head. Combined, our 2 internal carotid arteries are responsible for supplying blood to more than 80% of the brain. That's a lot of blood. And it's because of these major arteries and the fact that they're so closely positioned to our internal ear cavities that we're able to hear the lub dub of our pulse.